Well, here we go again with discussion around what's become really a dormant franchise for Microsoft, but was very popular back on the Nintendo 64 era, kind of sputtered out with the 360, but then was thrown back into the spotlight with the big Smash Brothers announcement. And that's Banjo, Banjo-Kazooie, Banjo-Tooie, nuts and bolts. But it appears Microsoft could actually be developing a new one. At least that's according to an insider that you may have heard of before, but we'll go over exactly what's going on here today. So guys, enjoy this video. Make sure to hit the like button. Subscribe if you're new here to the Spawnwave channel. So let's head over here. This was posted up on My Nintendo News, but it made the rounds quickly yesterday. I mean, it was as soon as it got picked up, it was being reported. Headlines were all over the place. Insider claims a Banjo-Kazooie game has been greenlit. The reason this is so funny, of course, is MVG discussed this on Nate the Hate podcast, and Reddit picked it up, and it wasn't announced at the next big Xbox event, and then MVG got banned, and it's been something we've been kind of joking with him about for a while. But keep that in mind as we get into some of the info here, because of course I reached out to the source of this whole thing and what's caused these headlines, which is Nate the Hate. Nate got picked up because he posted something on Reset Era about this, and then Idle Sloth posted it, and then a bunch of websites picked it up and ran the story. So what did Nate say? Well, I did enlarge it here so you can read it a bit easier, but he was asked what happened to that Banjo game. Canceled, I guess. Well, he says it's still an active project, but it didn't get the green light until early last year. There is a lot to do, and development can change a lot. Abandoned ideas, internal reboots, etc. So you have Banjo in pre-production, and they do have to figure out what exactly this game's going to be. It went completely out into left field with something like Nuts and Bolts, obviously trying to come up with a new wrinkle for the series, and I don't think it necessarily went over that well with most people who played Banjo back on the Nintendo 64. I don't really know what other direction they could have necessarily gone with. If they had made basically the same kind of game with some refinements and some new platforming ideas and just new worlds to explore, would that have been enough for people? Maybe. I mean, we don't really know, obviously, at this time because we got Nuts and Bolts. But the 3D platforming genre has... It's interesting because I feel like it has kind of shrunken down a bit since those days, but also it's kind of grown when it comes to Nintendo themselves, obviously with Mario just cruising along right now. Mario Odyssey is incredibly popular. Mario 3D World, even though it was technically a re-release, remaster from the Wii U days, did well. And it seems like Nintendo is poised to announce another 3D Mario that honestly might work to just launch their entire next generation. So I feel like the genre is still popular enough to release and create a new Banjo game. But the question I see come up online currently, is there a place for Banjo with Xbox Now? Like the platform, the user base? Because I do see just people who have Xbox podcasts or fans of it and are talking on social media who are just not really interested in a Banjo game. And I guess that can bring up the conversation of, does it make sense for Microsoft to limit it to the Xbox? Because, I mean, there's a whole world out there for Banjo if Microsoft looks at this, as they have said, as a case-by-case basis, and maybe Banjo comes out as a Game Pass release, of course, in the Xbox ecosystem, and they also just sell it on Nintendo's platform and probably make a bunch of money off of Nintendo's user base. Now, 3D platforming in general, as I've mentioned, people buy into the Switch now and probably Nintendo's next generation system with that in mind, that they probably will get a big-time 3D platform or maybe multiple ones from Nintendo themselves. And going into that kind of an investment, that platform with that mindset, means that, yeah, Banjo would probably do pretty well. Something like New Super Lucky's Tale. So they had Super Lucky's Tale that released on Xbox specifically, right? Microsoft worked to publish it. Then we get New Super Lucky's Tale that releases on Xbox, but also goes to other platforms and seemed to do pretty well on the Switch. And I think that makes a lot of sense, again, just based on the user base and what their expectations are, versus Xbox, where you're thinking more along the lines of first-person shooters, more mature-rated style games like a Hellblade 2, like a Redfall, like a Starfield, Fable, and and so on there. But I think this makes a lot of sense for Microsoft either way, even if it's just a game that is just only exists on Game Pass. The reason Game Pass I think is so intriguing to myself and maybe others is it should open up the potential for these kinds of projects, because you need variety and you need some kind of off the wall weird stuff to throw in there just for variety's sake. So you could just do, obviously, all first-person shooters, and you would have some people subscribing to the service. But if you can cast a wide net of all kinds of genres, and that includes racing, fighting games, action-adventure, first-person shooters, platformers, you would start to just accumulate more and more users, or as Microsoft says, monthly active users over time. The fact that I see something like Pentiment existing in the service, it to me makes sense to have some of the more experimental games, but also games where you could just take a shot at it and see what happens, see how the user base responds, see if maybe you can release it in the Game Pass and also put it on another platform like Nintendo's probably next-gen system at this point, if it's still in, we'll say, earlier development now. You could probably make a bunch of money there and then also accrue new signups just for that game. And maybe you can even find a new mascot with Banjo by doing that. Now, we have seen Nintendo and Microsoft work together quite a bit with even Nintendo Switch Online releases. If you look at that, again, Banjo is in there, GoldenEye, which did take many different parties, and that included Nintendo and Microsoft, and even recently, Jet Force Gemini. I mean, that was earlier this month that came out. So there's clearly still communication and a relationship there for these kinds of games. So yeah, it wouldn't shock me if Microsoft looked at this and said, okay, this is the case where we will release it on another platform, and might even have a bit of a reach to the Nintendo audiences, like, oh, maybe we should check out what's on Xbox if they are producing these kinds of games. Remember when Banjo got announced for Smash and Sakurai said, hey, if you want to play Banjo, go to the Xbox, like they're available now. The Xbox trended in Japan for the first time. It's just because Sakurai mentioned that's where Banjo was. So it's still on gamers' minds around the world, Banjo-Kazooie, and I think just in general that shows the impact that this franchise had back on the Nintendo 64, and yes, it does play into nostalgia, but if they could figure this out, I really think there is a pretty big franchise that they can revive here. But I think that's also the situation that Microsoft is in right now. Who revives this thing? Like, who do you hand this off to work on it? Because Rare, it's not the same Rare, all right, that worked on Banjo-Kazooie back in the late 90s and like the early, 2000, 2001, nothing like that. It's very different now, clearly. Look, they're doing Sea of Thieves. They have, Everwild coming up. They're not really looking at something like Banjo-Kazooie. So people are looking, of course, at Toys for Bob, since Microsoft now owns Activision Blizzard, and that would make sense that they're at least drawing up plans to figure this out, and okay, now here comes Activision Blizzard, let's have Toys for Bob do it. It's kind of like how they've been looking for a way to bring back Killer Instinct, and they finally figured it out by getting Iron Galaxy back on board with this update that they've done, and who knows, maybe they go on to develop a brand new Killer Instinct for their next generation system that is discussed currently as being a 2026-2027 project. But there is one other studio that I'm looking at right now under Activision Blizzard. Let's say this whole time Microsoft's been looking for a studio to create Banjo-Kazooie. Like, they have an idea as to how to do it. Okay, here's the direction we're going to take the franchise in. We just need somebody to take it out of pre-production and then make the active development and push hard to the finish line. I'm kind of looking at Blizzard Albany. So Blizzard Albany was Vicarious Visions, and they've worked on the Crash Bandicoot series, of course, Tony Hawk, Skylanders, and while I would like to see them go back and do a new Tony Hawk game, because variety in Game Pass makes a ton of sense, and we're kind of left here hanging with Tony Hawk Pro Skater 1 and 2. Let's go 3 and 4. Let's go Underground. Let's do a brand new one. I feel like they could absolutely pull off Banjo, like a new Banjo game, whether that's a new Banjo-Kazooie title, Banjo, what's the 3E? There's ideas as to the titling, sure, but I feel like they could handle that 3D platformer, and I think put a very interesting spin on it that they have done in the past with some of these other franchises. Also, the fact that I feel like Toys for Bob is doing another Spyro game. They just might be busy right now working on that. And sure, let's see what Blizzard Albany can do. Again, I know they were turned into a support studio, but that doesn't necessarily mean they couldn't work on a new Banjo game just to add on to the other support roles that they have. So I'm curious as to how this comes along, when they're ready to show it, and if MVG can finally get unbanned on Reddit. How long is too long? If he talked about this like 2 years ago or something, or a year and a half ago, if this thing doesn't get announced until like 2026, do people still give him credit for it? Because I feel like MVG was there from the start. When the documents were being drawn up, figured out the sketches on the napkin, he was there, and he knew this whole time. But let me know what you guys think about this down below, and let me know if you're someone who would like to see Banjo come back, and if there's a place for this what's been a dormant franchise on the current Xbox with its audience. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.